my dangerous idea is that I'm not going to give my long-tail talk. Instead, I'm going to give a talk I've never given before. So wish me luck. And I'd like to talk about a guy who had his own dangerous idea. He asked what happens when things are free. This is Carver Mead. He is a Caltech professor. And he was one of the first people to really internalize the lessons of Moore's Law. And what he realized that Moore's Law meant that transistors, that the elements of semiconductors were going to get cheaper and cheaper. As semiconductors got cheaper and cheaper, the individual transistors, which were once expensive, were essentially going to be free. And he asked the question, what happens when transistors get free? And the answer is that you should waste them. The traditional method of computing was that you need to be extremely careful and prudent in your use of this scarce computing resource. And he said, well, if it were free and like air, and you could use as much of it as you want, what would you do? So he preached the gospel of the economics of VLSI, very large-scale integration, which was the beginnings of the sort of the new semiconductor era. And the guy who listened and understood what question he was asking and actually thought about what you might do with free transistors was Alan Kay, who was at Xerox PARC. And Alan realized that one thing you could do was something wasteful on a screen. So the old model of computing was that the processor was so expensive, the transistors were so pricey, that you had to use them for the algorithm itself. That they must be used to run the code, to process the information, to produce the answer. And you had to be very, very discriminating about who got to use the computers. You had to be discriminating about how they used the computers. And you had to be very discriminating in the way in which the computers interacted with this person, because the processing must be used for the computational task itself. And so you ended up with command lines. And what Alan Kay asked was, well, what if you wasted transistors on something trivial, like icons and animation and mice and eye candy? What would that do? That is a very scary thinking when transistors cost a lot of money. But when you get more and more of them every year, you can start to waste them. And that created this. And that created the personal computer revolution. And that expanded the computing world from a small group of elite to all of us. And we found things to do with computers that the small group of elite never would have thought of themselves, because they wasted transistors to make computers easy to use, to make computers beautiful, to make computers fun, and they completely changed the way we thought about computers. They thought about abundance, not scarcity. Another thing that's becoming free is storage. The old model of storage was that you have to be careful about what you store. You have to delete things. You need to be discriminating. And there was a business in webmail, and you may remember, you might get, I think you got 2 megabytes on Hotmail. And then Google looked at the economics of abundance, and they said, you know what, storage is going to become cheap faster than people can use it. So we're going to give people gigabytes, and then 2 gigabytes. And this is actually a screen from their site at the moment. This number right there, that actually increments as you go. As you sit there, you watch as you get more and more storage, faster than you can use it. And then you think about, what was this your mailbox is full thing? Where did that come from? And it came from scarcity thinking. Google thought different because they looked at what free could enable, and they managed to revolutionize what was previously a pretty mature business of webmail. The television industry and video industry is all about scarcity. They have limited channels, there are limited hours in the day, prime time is only so long, and they're extremely discriminating about what gets out. When I say discriminating, I don't mean they necessarily apply a high quality bar. They need to put things on those scarce channels that will have very broad appeal. And so you fall back on formulas, you fall back on lowest common denominator, you fall back on a somewhat lowbrow interpretation of what should be on television, and it's a very narrow definition as well. And then another company realized that channels could be free, and that anybody could get online, and you didn't have to discriminate, and the marketplace could sort it out. And later you'll meet one person who is exactly what's enabled when you think of bandwidth and channels as being free. And to get expanded even further, there is now something called 3D printing. And what 3D printing does is it takes bits, like a CAD/CAM drawing, and turns them into atoms. It does it by taking the information from a screen and using a laser to trace a resin or powder, and out of this bath comes an actual object. What's interesting about that is that now complexity is free as well. In a manufacturing world, when you want to make 3 gears, costs 3 times to make as 1 gear. In a 3D printing world, this object costs no more to make than a block of plastic. A plastic toy costs the same as a Timex watch made by the same technique. Now, for the first time in history, complexity is free as well. And what beautiful, extravagant, unnecessarily complex things will we make now? Because we can. What's going to be the Mac OS of physical objects? So you now can realize that there's 2 ways to see the world. You can see the world the way we've traditionally seen it, through scarcity, through limits, limited shelf space, limited screens, limited stations. And then you can also see the world through this new lens of abundance. For 100 years, the channels by which we get content and products out to the world have been limited. We've been forced to be extremely prudent in the way we use them. We've been discriminating, and we've only let the tiniest fraction of everything out there get out, because they're the only ones that pass the economic test of scarce distribution mechanisms. But now for the last 10 years, we've had the rise of new marketplaces that have infinite shelf space. This is an example I actually use from my book. Walmart, you may think of Walmart as being a marketplace of abundance, but it's a mile wide and an inch deep. They have about 5 of every kind of product you might imagine, but there are 500 or 5,000. This is the example on the right is from Amazon. KitchenAid makes mixers, and in most stores you can buy it in 1 of 3 colors. You can buy it in white, and then usually the store will have an exclusive, cobalt red or cobalt blue or red, and that's all the variety you get. But they make it in 57 different kind of colors, and it's just a pull-down menu on Amazon. And it always turns out that every year there's one color that nobody expected that's going to be in the top 10. At the beginning of the years, the stores bid on who's going to get the hot colors, and last year, one of the hot colors was tangerine. No one knows why, no one expected it, and it only became visible because customers were able to choose all of the options, and they weren't forced to choose the ones that only made sense in the shelf space of Walmart or another retailer. A blockbuster video is a classic example of the economics of scarcity. Not only do they have limited shelf space, but they have to have a physical copy of each DVD that they're going to rent, and that's why you see, this week's releases stacked 100 high. But of course, on Netflix, you have infinite shelf space, and the number of copies, one copy doesn't force out another. And as a result, rather than just the blockbusters at Blockbuster, you can have subgenres that don't make any sense in the traditional way of distributing films, either theaters or rental stores. These are the independent subgenres. If it turns out one of the most popular is the indie gay and lesbian. That's not pornography, by the way. That's just gay and lesbian themes. They don't make sense on the shelves of Blockbuster. Their assumption was the market wasn't big enough to justify the high economic cost of traditional retail. Netflix didn't have to apply that test, and Netflix found, in fact, there was a huge demand for these genres that hadn't been tapped before. There was a latent demand for niche products out there that was assumed to be essentially zero, but when you could test it in a marketplace where shelf space is free, you discover it's much, much larger than you actually thought. 2 weeks ago, Tower Records went into liquidation. The end of an era. It's a scarcity model of music distribution, distributing plastic discs on shelves with limited shelf space. And what drove it out of business, of course, was the fact that the consumers are flocking to an abundant marketplace. iTunes has more than 3 million tracks. The peer-to-peer networks have 9 million tracks. There's probably 25 million tracks out there, and out there in vinyl or in live shows or remixes. They're soon going to be available. And meanwhile, the standard record store might only have between 50 or 60,000 tracks. Extraordinary abundance online. The audience is flocking to choice and variety and more. And that's what's enabled when you have digital files, which operate by the economics of abundance. That's television as we've known it for the last 50 years. And this is television as we know it today. That's Lonely Girl 15. She is one of the first YouTube stars. No one had to greenlight her project. She didn't have to get her foot in the door of a studio. She didn't need permission. No one focus grouped it. They just did it. And as of 3 weeks ago, she had an audience that was equivalent to some network TV shows. It turned out that she was actually a project by some independent filmmakers. They made it in their apartment. They did it because they could. That's what an abundant market allows. It allows anything to get out there and for the marketplace to sort it out. It doesn't have to pass somebody's predetermined test of what's going to be popular or not. The audience will decide. So this is how it maps to the long tail. The red part here, this is the curve of any marketplace where you rank the products or the people or the content in order, and you get some that are very popular, those are the blockbusters, and then a long tail of minority tastes, none of which are terribly popular, but there are so many of them. And the red part is the world of the 20th century. This is the world seen through scarce marketplaces, of scarce shelf space, of scarce screens and stations and channels. And as a result, it's like seeing the world through the wrong end of the telescope. We've been able to see the tiniest fraction of the true diversity and culture and variety out there because we were only seeing the stuff that passed that economic test of the scarce marketplace. To get on the shelf of Walmart, the product needs to turn or sell 1.5 to 2 times a week in the average store. The vast majority of everything doesn't pass that test. And even things that do pass that test don't pass it for very long, and they fall off the shelf space as sales decline. But Walmart is America's largest retailer. And that is the way that most of America sees the world of products and culture. And that is the left part of the long tail. But now in these new marketplaces, the iTunes, the Netflixes, the eBays, and even the Google and the blogosphere, that is the long tail. Everything gets out there. And now for the first time, we can measure the latent demand for everything else that didn't pass the test. And we're finding out that it's not just a big market, but the fastest growing one of all, and far richer in terms of what's in it and what it makes us as a culture as we go down it than we've ever seen before. This is the long tail of media. The old way of measuring media and entertainment products was in terms of popularity. Viewers, audience, subscribers, things like that. But there's a new way of measuring impact in an abundant marketplace. And that's based on attention and reputation, based on incoming links. So rather than just ranking them by the subscribers, assuming they're all equal, instead you measure incoming links as incoming links are word of mouth. They're word of mouth embodied in the form of hyperlinks. And that's what you can now measure. That's what Google measures when they decide who's going to rank high on the results. They don't make any decisions about the content. They don't look at the traffic. They don't do any semantic analysis. They just measure what the marketplace thinks in terms of incoming links. So the things that come up highest on your results are the ones that have the highest authority. And that authority comes from measuring what other people thought of that. This is the rankings of the world's media sites, or world sites in general, by Technorati. And Technorati, again, ranks by incoming links. It's a very different way of looking at the world. First, you see that it is, in fact, a long tail, that a small number are very popular, and then there's a long tail of things that are less popular. But let's go down. The first one's the New York Times. No surprise there. CNN, Washington Post, the AP, the BBC, San Francisco Chronicle, The Guardian, Yomiuri, us. This is, by the way, on the online measurement. I recognize we wouldn't be here by traditional metrics. The Boston Globe, Times UK, and these four punks and their band manager are Boing Boing. That's Mark, David, John, Corey, and Shenny. They're bloggers. They're scattered around the world. They blog part-time, possibly in their pajamas. They have more influence than Forbes, Time, Fox News, Business Week, PBS, NPR. This is Pete Rojas. He runs Engadget. It's a Gadgets blog. And he has more influence than MSNBC, MTV, CBS News. This is Frank Warren. He runs Post Secret. People send him postcards with secrets on them, and he posts them. He has more influence than CBS News, CNN Money, The Telegraph in the UK, the Canadian Broadcasting Company, Sydney Morning Herald, the San Jose Mercury News. And this is Marcus, who runs the Daily Kos, a political blog. And he has more influence than the Chicago Tribune, Reuters, the International Herald Tribune, the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, the Financial Times, ESPN, and this is Arianna Huffington, who runs the Huffington Post. And she has more influence than the Post-Gazette, PR Newswire, and so on. Brian Lamb, who runs Gizmodo, a gadget blog. This is Glenn Reynolds, a University of Tennessee law professor who blogs in between classes at Instapundit. And this is Michelle Malkin, another political blogger. And so it goes. The red lines are bloggers. The blue lines are mainstream media. The red lines are typically one person blogging part-time. The mainstream media are institutions with thousands of employees. That's what changes in a marketplace where anybody can get out there, and word of mouth and reputation sorts out what's good and what's not some guy in a suit like me ahead of time. So I think about this now as I'm a Condé Nast editor, and I think about how this applies to our business. And I realize that we live in the economy of scarcity. Our pages are scarce, are expensive, our content is expensive, shipping, production, printing, all very expensive. I have to be incredibly discriminating. I have to try to have a perfect Fabergé egg of a product, polished. I control the horizontal, I control the vertical. I have to guess at what people want. And one story displaces another, so I have to be really careful about what I let into our pages. That's a scarcity model. But on July 11th, we bought our website back. You may ask why I didn't have a website before, and that's a long story. We'll save it for afterwards. But now we do, and now I have to figure out what our policy is going to be on the website. And the website's an abundant marketplace. You have infinite shelf space. Google has 2.5 trillion results for blog. This is in the world of abundance, there is room for everything. That one page doesn't displace another. That the bad doesn't drive out the good. In fact, the marketplace can just figure out what's good and what's bad. And this really changes my thinking. Whatever standards, I've spent 5 years now setting standards as to what a Wired story should be, and I'm not going to throw that all out the window. Because those standards were based on having to be extremely discriminating, because our pages were scarce. The new standards basically are, in an abundant economy, is that we'll let the marketplace decide what our standards should be. We have a sensibility, and we have a worldview, and we have certain responsibilities, but the standards are going to be much broader, and the range of what we do is going to be much broader. And this is a radical change in the company, because in a sense, I'm changing the rules. And I'm changing the rules because the economics have changed on me. So if if the magazine is a Fabergé egg, then the website's going to be a scrambled egg, and we'll see what that means. This is one of our table of contents in a new redesign, not yet finished. And this is what I guess people are going to want. These are the stories that I approved, I predicted would be popular. I ranked them in order of what the popularity I think they're going to have. And we immortalized this in dead trees, and we shipped them to 650,000 people. That's me guessing. And this is Dig. Dig is a website where anybody can post stories, and then the community votes on them. This is pre-filtering. This is me filtering, deciding what gets in and guessing what's going to be popular in what order ahead of time. And this is post-filtering. It all gets out there, and you measure what's successful and what's not. Why couldn't our homepage be run like Dig? Rather than me guessing at what should be at what level in the hierarchy, why not let the readers vote and dynamically change over time? Why guess if you can measure? In my scarcity model as a magazine editor, I have to say no to almost everything. My job is to say no. I try to do it nicely, but that's my job. On the website, my job is to say yes. What do you want to do? Fine, do it. I don't have to guess, and I don't have to predict, and I don't have to even check that it's going to be good, because if it's not good, it won't get traction and it'll fall to the bottom. If it is good, it will get traction and it'll rise to the top. And I don't have to be the gatekeeper anymore, because we now have a way of marketplace that can do this after the fact based on what the audience really wants rather than our guesswork. So, when you think about this applies across the board. As we go from company to company and we talk about the changing marketplace, as their economics switch to an abundant economics, they have to change their thinking as well. So the old model of releasing products and services and content is that you need to have a business case. And so we've all done it. We write our ROI memos and we get the CFO to sign off on them. This is why I think it's going to be a good business. And after that, our return on investment memo is signed off, the project gets green-lighted. The new model is, of course, you just do it and we'll figure it out. It costs so little to do things. You don't have to have a business case up front. I realize that sounds very 1990s dot-com bubbly, but it's true. If the costs are low, the problem with the dot-com bubble things is the costs weren't low, that you had the rooftop parties and the big, and the huge staffs. But it's now so easy to launch things for so cheap that we don't need a business plan. It's not throwing money. It's not throwing away money. It's not guessing. When you guess and you guess wrong, you throw away money. If you don't have to guess, but you measure and you invest money where things get traction the most, that's actually a smart way to use, we'll figure it out. In the scarcity model, it's basically this. Everything is forbidden unless it's permitted. That's me saying no. In the abundant model, everything's permitted unless it's forbidden. I'm not going to ask my employees to ask permission. I'm going to let them do what they want on whatever subjects they want. I hope I never have to forbid anything. Again, there's room for a much broader distribution of tastes and interests and approaches to what we do. In the scarcity model, we have to, again, guess. The Hollywood studio executives, the record labels, the television executives, the book editors, all of us are guessing, and that's a form of paternalism. In the abundance model, we say that the audience knows better than we do what they want, and we stop guessing. In the scarcity model, it's very top-down. We decide what the policy is going to be, what the missions are, and what the standards are, and then we propagate that, through the ranks of our employees and into our products. In the abundance model, it's very bottoms up. My new policy is that I will do anything the interns think I should do. So the interns just told me to do a press conference in Second Life, which I did. I don't know whether it was a good idea or not. It was surreal. I kind of had fun. There were 50 other avatars there. I got to sign my book in Second Life with a little sort of book signing circle widget that they built. I don't have any intuitive feel for whether that's a good use of my time, but my interns thought it was a good use of my time, and that's good enough for me because I don't have a monopoly on information, and I can't pretend to be omniscient. Instead, I recognize that we have a pyramid structure, and the youngest people, and the most of them, are the ones who are out there and have different views. And now, because it's so cheap to let them do what they want to do, I'm going to listen to their advice and take their guidance on what we do going forward. And I'll bet many of our most interesting blogs are going to be the ones that I never could have guessed, never would have suspected would be popular. But because they're driven by somebody's passions who are not constrained by my narrow view of what a Wired blog should be, I think they're going to find a much broader range and possibly the most successful ones. And finally, command and control. That is the 20th century way of corporate management. And to use the phrase of my friend Kevin Kelly, I think the 21st century management model is going to be out of control, of letting everything happen and then dynamically responding and measuring to what the audience thinks, to what's actually can be determined once products get out there, and then amplifying the good and suppressing the bad. So I'm going to show you one last thing, which is a video made by my friend Peter Hirschberg from Technorati that maps this back to my world.
No one would have believed in the closing years of the 20th century that our most popular media were being watched in a new way by a force that was quietly gathering strength. With blind confidence, we considered them our own, our audience, our subscribers, our cuddly couch potatoes. With infinite complacency, we blithely segmented and sold them to advertisers. We learned to shape their habits, mold their desires, and give them the illusion of infinite choice. Yet from their side of the screen, with envious eyes, they studied us. And bit by bit, they learned and linked and drew their plans against us, wielding weapons we ourselves provided. And then, early in the 21st century, came the great unraveling. We offered free choice, but all they heard was free. We devised more powerful, more complete, more feature-rich software, but they preferred to grow their own. They pounced, and they blogged, and they blew the house down. The world we knew was forever disintermediated, whatever that means. They have tasted power, and there are a lot more of them than there are of us. High inside our glass towers, our greatest minds prepare to respond.
Well, can't we just start blogging back at them?
Well, yeah, but where's the money in that?